Hello and welcome to another Big Finish video. Today we're going to be revisiting my ranking for the top 5 best 5th Doctor monthly range stories. A couple of years ago I did a video similar to this for each of the Doctors for the monthly range, and those videos were made round about the time I was still developing making videos, and so there was no audio from me, it was just clips from the actual stories themselves, and the visuals aren't that great, so I think it's about time, given that I've listened to more Big Finish since then, that I update them. But before we get into the list though, just like to say, if you haven't already, please support the channel by hitting subscribe, turning on notifications, giving it a like if you enjoy it, comment your top 5 favourite 5th Doctor stories below, and you can find and follow me on Twitter here. At number 5 we have Spare Parts by Mark Platt. Probably the most iconic 5th Doctor release.
This area is restricted to civilians.
Why? What aren't we supposed to see? Sounds like your society's in its death throes. Not the end of the world. You could be right. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Mondas doesn't have a future after all.
And originally was on my other top 5, though it's gone down slightly since I've listened to more over time. While it is a little bit overrated, it is still a great story. Not only for the concept of being the first Cyberman story, or basically an origin for the Cybermen, but it's also the first time we really get to see them exploring Adric's death and the consequences that it had for the Doctor and Nyssa, though this is something that is explored later on. They do a really good job at world building Mondas and seeing this world slowly fall apart, and how the Cybermen are an eventuality, and how even though the Doctor wants to prevent it, he knows he can't, and that whatever happens, the Cybermen are going to become a reality, though he hopes that with this opportunity he can somehow make them a better force rather than what they eventually become. At number 4 we have The Kingmaker by Nev Fountain.
Right. It's about 14:85. I'm heading for a little tavern on Fleet Street called the Kingmaker to do a little detective work. Someone once told me it can be a useful place to find out all sorts of stuff. You can't miss it, just head for St. Paul's Cathedral. The old Norman one, not the one with the dome. That's not there yet.
I didn't know what to expect going into this story, and it is probably one of the most bizarre concepts that Doctor Who has ever done. At face value it seems like it's bog standard pseudo-historical, but it gets very meta and quite over the top at points, and it does a lot of things that I think a lot of people would get annoyed at in regards to continuity and the rules of time travel.
Is it a custom of this age for a man to place a hand on your bottom as a form of greeting?
Not really, no.
Error, ma'am! Did you just break that guy's arm?
Yes.
It might not be for everyone, especially if you don't like fourth wall jokes, but for me I find this to be a really funny story, and it takes a lot of risks which I don't think any other Doctor Who stories often take. Number 3, Fanfare for the Common Men by Eddie Robson.
This is what I was talking about, Nyssa!
Why is everyone making so much noise, Doctor? We can't even see them yet!
This is what the Beatles inspired in people. Good grief.
What is it, Doctor?
It's not there.
Who are these Beatles then? Are they another group?
Yes.
Are they any good?
You must have heard of them.
Nobody's as good as the Common Men.
This is the 5th Doctor's entry in the 1963 trilogy, and it's a very creative story. If you've seen the film Yesterday, it very much tackles a similar concept, that being what if the Beatles never became a popular band? What if they never existed? But this is far more interesting of an execution of that idea, as we get to see the Doctor and Nyssa living in an alternative timeline where another band got their success, so the two of them separate across time to try and figure out what happened and how to get the Beatles back. While I'm not a huge fan of the Beatles, I was able to spot a lot of the in-jokes and references to some of the most iconic moments of their career, like the Paul McCartney being dead rumour, and seeing how the common men very much went through those similar experiences. It's quite interesting, and I think a major Beatles fan will get a lot more out of the story than I did, but I was still able to consider it a really fun time, even without that context. Number 2, The Peterloo Massacre by Paul Mars.
What's happening to the TARDIS? The navigational systems are malfunctioning due to travelling backwards through decades of carboniferous emission.
Yes, it appears your girl doesn't much care for the Industrial Revolution.
So you're saying we got lost in the smog?
This was voted as one of the best of the monthly range in an official vote, and I can definitely see why. This is one of the best pure historicals and one of the darkest Doctor Who stories I've ever heard.
What are you talking
It's
about,
August the
man?
15th, 1819. We're in Manchester.
So?
We're on the eve of the darkest day in this city's history.
It's not an event I'm particularly familiar with, but I think the story does a great job explaining it and the injustice behind how, despite all the terrible things that happen to these people, the history books very much try to cover up what happened, and it is quite shocking. And it's quite interesting how it's structured, that essentially the massacre takes place at the end of part 3, and part 4 is mostly a wind down and a reflection on the event. Part 4 isn't the climax, which is, I think, an interesting way to go about it, seeing the aftermath and a bit more time to dwell on what's happened. It's rare to see a kind of story where essentially the big action climax happens quite early on, so we actually get to see the consequences play out. Before we get to number 1, here are some honourable mentions. Thin Time and Madquake. Part of a brief stint where they would have 2 stories in one collection. This follows the 5th Doctor and his companions being separated and have a story each, where they reflect on the events of a previous story and really dives into their characters. Time in Office, a really fun story which explores the concept of what if the Doctor actually became president of Gallifrey, and we get to see all the misadventures he has trying to improve his planet. And Eye of the Scorpion, a great introduction to the really underrated companion that is Eramem. And the number 1 spot is The Church and the Crown by Kevin Scott and Mark Wright.
Is this really another time?
Yes, and place, Paris, 1626 to be exact, good few centuries after your time.
This is one of the most underrated releases of the monthly range, and the reason I consider this to be the best 5th Doctor story is because it's a story that is really suited to his particular version of the character. Essentially, this is very much Doctor Who does the Three Musketeers, and as such, a lot of the characters are very over the top and very larger than life. So, as a result, the Doctor acts as a good source of down-to-earth humour, as he's very much the straight man of the cast and helps to bring it down, compared to something like Exile, where everybody's a very comic character. It's very hard to not get frustrated at it, and so he is a welcome presence to sort of quell the madness at points.
Run me through Del Mar, and 50 will step forward to take my place.
50 of the Cardinal's guards to one King's musketeer. Hardly a challenge, Moran.
It's also really funny, and it's another example of how great pure historicals can be, and it's a good opportunity to show off how good of a companion Erimem is. And it's a shame that we don't get as much content with her anymore. I understand why, the actress not wanting to be involved, and the fact that they didn't really want to stretch the 5th Doctor and Perry sort of time together due to the fact that they really shouldn't have, given that people prefer the idea of Planet of Fire leading right into Caves of Androzani. But 5, Perry and Erimem are such a great dynamic that I don't really mind that.
Richelieu had a vision for uniting the cultural diversity.
Richelieu? Wasn't he the bad guy?
No, quite the opposite. Alexander Dumas has a lot to answer for.
And also, the rest of the cast is great and really memorable. And those are my current 5 favourite 5th Doctor monthly range stories. They may change in the future, but for now, that's what I'm going to stick with. I hope you enjoyed the video, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.